I think I would have basically quit or given up if not for the fact that at those dark moments I'll compare to that plane crash and say, okay, this is very bad, but then it's not as bad as dying.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not investment, legal, or financial advice. Opinions are those of the host and guests and do not reflect any affiliated entities. Investing involves risk, and past performance is not indicative of future results. The host and guests may hold positions in discussed securities. Now, please enjoy the show. Michael, thank you so much for joining me today. Super excited to chat with you. All right, Michael, you are the CEO and co-founder of Frodobots Labs. Frodobots is a crypto-powered robotics platform that uses low-cost, remote-controlled robots to collect real-world data for training AI models. You're also a third-time founder, and a not-so-fun fact, you're actually a plane crash survivor. All right, so before diving into all the fun and wonderful world of robots, I'd love to hear about that experience. Obviously it's not a happy thing to talk about, but I mean it's so rare, and I know you've told me the story before. It's impacted you in a major way. Could you tell me how being a plane crash survivor has impacted your life?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thanks for having me on the pod. Yeah, I would say honestly, on hindsight, the fact that obviously I survived, it is actually probably one of the best things that have ever happened to me. Obviously, it's not a fun experience, but it is a very, very good thing that have happened to me because is a very good, I would say, bullshit barometer for myself, right? I think before the plane crash, um, I think I lie to myself a lot, like in what I think I'm doing, like what motivates me as a person, things like that. Like I don't want to get in too philosophical immediately, but it is very much like that, right? Because I was literally seconds away from death. Like I was so the plane crashed into the sea, and it's a true miracle that I survived. I was drowning basically, right? And towards the end, I was basically blacking out. So I mean, I have a very long scar on my shoulder because of that, but obviously I survived. So and yeah, I mean, I would say at that time I was actually um a head of investment for a family office in Abu Dhabi. I was earning drawing a decent pay, managing I would say billions of dollars, on the balance sheet. So I have a lot of, I think I was a very cocky guy, let's say, looking back. But then, when I was being so close to death, I realized that all these like it's all BS, right? It doesn't really matter. Um, and yeah, so the fact that I survived, I realized that life can be really, really short, and you never quite know, when you need to leave, and so um, so yeah, I mean, and then I realized I just want to build things. I'm a very geeky person, nerdy person, so I just want to build so I started doing startups. And honestly, I'm like you say, mentioned just now, this is my third time co-founding a startup. There are many a times I think I would have basically quit or given up if not for the fact that at those dark moments I'll compare to that plane crash and say, okay, this is very bad, but then it's not as bad as dying. So let's see. And I think in this case, for robots as well, when we first started like 3+ years ago, like robotics is a very dirty word in VC world. I think the mantra back then for sure is you don't touch hardware, number one, right? And robotics is the hardest of hardware. So all the more you shouldn't, right? So I got to give kudos to those very early investors that wrote us a bit of checks, right? Not big checks, but sufficient for us to get going. But of course, like the world has completely changed, right? Since ChatGPT, a lot of the advancements are starting to creep into robotics, and happy to go in depth into some of those. But yeah, I think that experience, in summary, set me up well in terms of the mindset of being a founder, because like founder is a very lonely journey, and it needs to be, because you only have I would say uns sorry, asymmetrical upside if you are contrarian and right. So for some period of time, you have to accept that the whole world disagree with you, which I think for the first 2 years of our project, certainly that's the case. I think now the world has completely flipped. I would say maybe too many people agree with my original thesis, so we need to run a lot faster. I mean, it does help with fundraising, obviously, but I mean, so it's hard to tell. But anyway, so I do think it helps me a lot in just being being an entrepreneur, being a founder, and when it gets lonely, when it gets down, I just thought, okay, it can go further down, so it's I'm not at the bottom, and so yeah, maybe unrealistically optimistic, but I think you really need that as a founder, especially in the early stages.
Yeah, I'm curious as to, can people experience, without some traumatic events that, like what you experienced, is it possible to have this such a major impactful event on your life where you kind of reframe your whole life and decide to chase after very large goals, hence like building in the robotics field before ChatGPT and before kind of humanoids hit the scene in a major way? I'm wondering if it's possible to experience these life altering events where you make these big changes and decisions without experiencing trauma, or maybe trauma is required in order for that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly don't need a plane crash for you to become a great founder. Like, look at all the great founders, you know. But if you really look into a lot of their earlier lives, they all have trauma of a different kind. Like mine is just dramatic, right? I nearly died. That's it. Um, but trauma can be, could be growing up, like, or like a lot of them tend to be immigrant because, like, by default, if you're an immigrant, you're a fish out of water in a new place, new language, and that could be a different kind of trauma. I'm an immigrant myself, like in Singapore. I grew up in Hong Kong, so coming to Singapore was also quite tough. Like I didn't speak English like nearly at all. I would say when I was a teenager when I came, so it was a tough adjustment period. Um, but I think you I think a person can be smart, but smart is not useful in my view to be a good founder. You just need grit, and sometimes you can be too smart for, yeah, as a founder, right? You need to be quite naively optimistic, like I say, or unrealistically optimistic, and that is good in my view, a good trait. But you cannot be too unrealistic at the same time. So it's I think for every founder is a different, and also depending on the cycle, like and also the particular industry, the dynamic in the market, I think it's quite different. Obviously there are many great founders who have very very different personal traits, and they all kind of make it. I certainly have not made it at all. I have failed basically. In my view, I failed for many years. Right, I'm still trying, and I'm still trying because I had that experience, but definitely you don't need a plane crash. I don't think, but having some um, you know, being able to just get back up your feet consistently is a must. Is a must. So
They say the difference between the master and the apprentice is the master's failed like 10,000 times, while the apprentice has failed once. So I think you're right about failure.
yeah, it's the same case as, like, I was just chatting with my teammate just now, like before this call, like the way, like, maybe the way he used ChatGPT. I say you just ask one time, it's not going to be sufficient. You're gonna keep on going back and forth, like until ChatGPT might fail you on the first prompt. But if you really give it a chance, you eventually will surprise you. So in life, I don't know whether that's a good analogy, but um, yeah, you cannot expect to get something great on your first try. I don't think, unless you're just lucky. Yeah.
So you mentioned ChatGPT and robotics, and
Mhm.
when I think of ChatGPT, I think of AI as kind of a software type of product. But you mentioned, hey, we started pursuing Frodobots before ChatGPT, and how has the robots industry or field changed since ChatGPT? Because you would imagine, from my standpoint, it probably hasn't changed at all, because we're talking about a purely software product, not like robotics.
Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to be um. So I mean, I think like most people, I was still like completely wowed by ChatGPT and the advancements since then, and the pace of advancement so fast. Um, but I was a firm believer in the trajectory. So during my first startup, I was actually in the Bay Area, and I remember crashing this course in Stanford. Um, which was taught by this PhD student. His name is Andre Karpathy. So he was still a PhD student. So I started crushing the course. And then that course really like set me into this so this is like circa 2016, 17, and I really like caught the bug basically. So actually since then I've been reading AI back then they called it machine learning, okay, papers. So during my second startup, I actually do a lot of machine learning, and throughout the years I've been reading papers. And so even though I'm not a researcher, so I'm not super technical myself, but I do spend a lot of time reading papers and trying to. So I would say I'm quite up to date. And what I observed maybe 3, 4, like when we first started this project was that my hunch was that the bottleneck towards a lot of let's take the sidewalk robot, because that's what we started and that's what we're still doing. And the main thesis, actually, why me and my brother started this company from a hobby project to a company is because my observation back then was that there are a bunch of sidewalk robot startups. Some of them, in fact, projects done by large companies like Amazon. Amazon used to have a program called sidewalk robot called Scout. I think they put a lot of like investment at its peak, maybe 400 people, working on the team. There are still great startups working on this problem. But my observation back then was that most of them try to do the AI thing from day one, which means that they will have a robot that is pretty expensive, around $10,000 actually, because they put it in an expensive GPU, fancy sensors, and all that, right? And this is 3-4 years ago. I guess back then maybe interest rate was still zero, so maybe it's somewhat doable, but clearly it's even harder to do it now. But even back then, I thought that like if you take the view that these things, maybe the bottleneck is not so much hardware or lack of algorithm, because back then I think some of these algorithm that has since has proven a lot very effective, have started actually 3-4 years ago started to show some signs of life. Offline reinforcement learning being one of them. So, and if you take that view of the world, which is very much, by the way, a Tesla worldview, okay, like you try to train things end to end, then actually this is a data collection problem, right? So having $10,000 robot, basically, if you look at those robots as data collection devices in the real world, $10,000 robot is a no go, right? How are you going to get the data? And so we thought very naively at the time, because we started out, honestly, this whole project started as a hobby project. Me and my brother were just trying to build a sidewalk robot by ourselves, right? It's just a maker typical weekend project that we do together. But we naively thought that, okay, someone should build a toy robot that is a dumb robot. Dumb meaning there's no GPU on it. So the idea though is that instead of trying to have the AI in day one, you yank out the AI, you just have it be 100% human remote control. Now, 3-4 years ago, it's still very much unproven, right? And first of all, no one has tried to do a $500 sidewalk robot right at the time. That's why we decided to do it. The other bigger thing is that, like, can you even get a latency good enough, right? Because, like, if it needs to be human control, then you need your latency to be low. And this, we took that bet because this happened during the pandemic, where, as you recall, like that's when the whole world jumped to Zoom. And my observation was that there was just a lot of infrastructure level investment that's brought forward by literally a decade, right? Obviously, we have video calls before then, but like that 1 year or so just vastly accelerated all this. So I felt a bit more confident that you can just ride that wave, such that you can be based in Chicago and then remotely control a robot like halfway across the world, let's say in Africa, and somehow be able to do it with a level of latency that for some robotic tasks is still feasible. And sidewalk robot, by the way, I've got one here. So this is our current version, right? It's literally like a toy, right? So like I mentioned, like our initial target was to get this to $500. This bugger right now, we retail for $200, and it's it's pretty good spec. But anyway, so clearly it can be done, all right. But at the time, no one has done it before, and therefore we wanted to try. But I would say maybe like at that time, this was my third startup, right? But it wasn't a crypto thing, honestly. I was very much a crypto skeptic at the time. I thought it was all scam until I would say only like the second month into it, when at that time it was only me and my brother doing it full time. So we discovered helium. And this is like, I think I want to say April 2022, right? So this is like when the market is still pretty hot, before the collapse. um, but helium really blew my mind, honestly, and I thought that it's fundamentally very, very different. Obviously, the cool kids call it deepin these days, right? But that's just, there's obviously Filecoin, things like that. You can argue those are all deepin, but I didn't know any better, right? I don't know what's Filecoin, I don't even know what's a crypto wallet and all that, but I was just blown away by helium, and I thought, okay, I need to learn from them, because we were trying to have $500 devices out there in the world. They also have $500 hotspots out there in the world. I look at that world map and say, hey, I want that world map. So, and that's when we started really going to this. I think that took the red pill on crypto. Yeah.
Okay, so going back to the initial kind of thesis there, because you were saying you were taking this class and you realized that the issue with, I guess, robotics broadly was the data. So how could you, I guess, what was telling you that? Because that to me is non-intuitive. It's like, the issue with robots is, I don't know, the actuators in the arms, or who knows, right? I'm not like a expert here, but I would think it'd be something more on the hardware side. But you're saying no, it's the actual kind of the data that's used to train the brains, essentially. So how did you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, I should say that definitely you need good hardware. This is the physical world after all, and physical world has no mercy. It's very brutal. Having good hardware definitely is required if you want to replace a human being, let's say, ultimately. It's just that the path to go there, it strikes me at the time. So I don't know whether you're familiar with the like, especially in self-driving, they have like so-called level 1 to level 5. I think back then, but even now, like, although some of them will claim otherwise, like I would say all the cyber robot projects, effectively, they are what I would consider level 2, which means probably the AI can drive maybe out 100 meters, maybe 99 meters right off the way. Maybe there's 1 meter somewhere that human need to intervene, let's say. But because you don't know when that 1 meter is going to happen, so you have humans watching over the bots, kind of all the time. Maybe one person can watch over 2 or 3 robots, but there's a limit to how much you can scale, because you do have to watch it quite carefully. And so if you work out the unit economics, I realized that level 2 is a very awkward place to be in terms of unit economics. Like, you have a very expensive hardware, like, but you're not offering a service that can fully replace a human, which is so hard to do, because a lot of people think that, let's say, for example, against Cyborg Robot, which is mostly used for last mile delivery, let's say. But if you really think about the DoorDash guy, yes, maybe 99.9% of what he does is doing that trip. But that last couple of meters he does on both ends is so general, like it's like it's so hard, all the way down to, let's say, whether he can press a lift, right, the button of a lift, right, or maybe doing basic customer support, right, ring the bell, have a chit chat with the person, or maybe at the restaurant pick up, oh, this is the wrong order, like that's it's and I think if you work at DoorDash and Uber Eats, you see all this, but as I thought about all this, I realized that, like, maybe the way to get to level 5, trying to do the AI prematurely, it's not gonna get you there. And since no one is trying to, like, do the so-called dumb robot version, I thought maybe you can do that. And you asked, like, what gave me the conviction. I guess you can say that I buy into the worldview of Tesla. So, like I said, I took a class under Andrew Carpathy, right? Obviously, he was at Tesla for a while. And I've been tracking what they do, and it strikes me that what Tesla was doing is very much collect real world data in the real world, learn from it. It's more like they are learning from humans, right? So if you look at each Tesla, to me, they're just like robots on wheels, basically. And effectively, the data that they're gathering, they obviously gather the video, but actually more importantly, they gather what the human driver is doing. And so, and that is actually a very critical part. Not just the video. I think having video is required, but having what the human does is the real gem, right? But once you have these two things, then I think you can set up a pipeline to literally learn from humans, right, at scale. So, and yeah, and I thought cyber robot needs a similar kind of so-called data flywheel. So and I can totally understand though, like why these cyber robot startups do what they do, because how do you? I mean, unlike a car, let's say, people will buy cars because they drive in them, right? A cyber robot, like, no one can see the cyber robot, right? So how do you deliver value kind of in day one so that people will pay for something, and obviously last mile delivery. So I do understand the go to market. A lot of them end up still trying to tackle a very difficult problem. Um, from day one, a lot of them are still trying, and I really give them kudos and of doing so. Um, so in a way, what we ended up doing is this, I guess, the gaming component, right? I but honestly, I also kind of stumbled onto it. I don't want to say I have it from day one. Like we were also trying to actually do last mile delivery. To be honest, um, I have driven our robot into a Starbucks at least 100 times or more. So the way I'll do it is because these robots, especially our current version, but our earliest version already have a speaker microphone. So what I'll do is, let's say order something on DoorDash, um, and do self pickup. I'll drive it into Starbucks, and then I'll shout through the microphone, and then usually, you know, um, the Starbucks girl will probably freak out for a bit, but then eventually I get my coffee, and so I did it like literally 100 times. We did a bunch of TikTok videos. Some of them actually went viral and all that. But I realized out of that 100 attempts, maybe 10 of them fail, right? So it sounds like, oh, we're nearly there, right? 90%, we're nearly there. And I would say, yeah, I mean, during those 90 time where it worked, I think it was magical, right? Because I can totally see how you can do, like, for example, some kind of like labor cost arbitrage, right? Because like I said, this thing can be done across the world, right? So hiring a person in New York to deliver versus, getting someone from, let's say, the Philippines or Indonesia to do it for you is a drastic difference. But then I look at those 10 times where it failed, I realized, if I broadly look at the way it failed, like you literally need to solve level 5, like literally have an AI that's as good as human, and also the hardware needs to be way better than even though $10,000 once. Like I said, like pressing the lift is a different thing, right? Going up the escalator, going up curbs, maybe going upstairs, going downstairs, avoiding the dogs, along the way, like just all these like hardware. So very very good hardware, and also very very good AI, and I realized those are almost nearly insurmountable. But then, so I was honestly a bit disappointed. I was like, oh gosh, maybe like this is just too hard to solve. Like maybe this is still not the time to jump into it fully. But then along the way, I discovered that me and my brother and a couple of the guys on the team were all fighting with each other to drive the robot because it's kind of funny. It's kind of fun to drive it. I don't know whether you know gaming title like Euro Truck Simulator. So I mean it's a pretty niche kind of gaming like experience, but I'm a sucker for those gaming titles. So I totally get why some gamers, some genre of gamers will like this kind of like it's not a racing game, but it's just a way to, like, I don't know, chill experience, right? But except that this happening in the real world, right? So yeah, and I would say since then we have really leaned in very very hard on the robotic gaming aspect. Um, to be honest, I think we have not fully proven it. Like we have a lot of anecdotal evidence, I would say, that of where this can go as an entertainment and fun gaming experience. Um, but I do think if you can figure out gaming, literally is a very nice wedge to allow these robots to generate some revenue, even though they don't have real world utility, but they're just funny to look at and play with.
Can you take me back to the initial thought process when you're first starting Frodobots? You're thinking, okay, sidewalk robots are going to be huge for delivery. Therefore, we want to create, the top, or the leading company in that field, and we're going to start with this model. And by making these cheapish, or not cheap, but less expensive, sidewalk robots, which will scale through crypto incentives and et cetera, et cetera. But was that initial vision like we want to take on delivery, or we're purely going to collect the data and then we're going to, somehow monetize that?
Yeah, I mean, initially, definitely, I wanted to do delivery, um, because like if you can really do delivery, then there's cash flow, right? Then you can support the growing of a fleet, and then once you have the growth of the fleet, then you collect data, right? So it's just that I mean, I think there are definitely very strong teams still going after this thesis, right? And I give them a lot of credit for still trying. But you can imagine that is a three-party like marketplace. Running that three-party marketplace is non-trivial. And who's your competition? Your competition are human beings who are extremely versatile in all kinds of scenarios, right? So I think it's really actually the question is not so much like the robots cost $10,000. Even if it's $20,000, if you can amortize over a number of years, it's still way cheaper than hiring the dude running around in San Francisco or New York, right? I think the bottom line is that these robots are still nowhere as good as doing the full thing end to end as a human, right? The DoorDasher. And being 99% there versus 99.9999%, like Six Sigma, right? I think it's a and oftentimes what I realize for a lot of robotic tasks, it doesn't have to just have to be last mile delivery. It could be folding clothes. It could be, if you ask a robot to cook a meal for you, things like that, right? Some people think that because of safety reason for self-driving, you need Six Sigma, right? But I would argue actually for the more mundane tasks that you would maybe eventually want a humanoid to do, let's say for you at home, let's say cook you a meal. Imagine if the way I think about it is, imagine if you think about typically the way they talk about success rate in robotic research paper these days is they call it episode, right? One episode could be, or one task could be, let's say, cracking an egg, right? That could be one task, right? Now, if you think about the entire series of frying egg, is a series of many subtasks. If each of them give you, I don't know, like you're only 99%, you're 99% to, if it's a series of 100 tasks, 99% to the power of 100, you realize you're less than 50%, right? So you really need it to be nearly 100% for every single sequence. And so, and I do think I'm a slightly more pessimistic. Maybe I know too much now these days because I'm so deep in the woods and talk to researchers all the time. I know a lot of the bottlenecks that still exist. But gaming it's a good wedge, like I said, because a 99% robot is still not good enough to replace the DoorDasher. But a 99% robot, or 99% like kind of success rate, it makes for a great game because like it takes a lot of effort to succeed, right? If you fail, it's just you fail the mission. That's it, right? And so, and I think that could be another very interesting wedge, to get the data flywheel going as well.
Yeah. So could you take me through the evolution of kind of your journey with Frodobots, where it went from, you want to do delivery, okay, it's actually extremely difficult. We need to get more data. So let's do more data, more experience. We'll do teleoperation. And then, with humans driving, it's some portion or the majority. And then actually we're going to gamify this because, it'll increase engagement and it'll be easier to get these teleoperators and we can reward them with different incentives. Was that kind of the evolution where like went from, we're going to do the delivery to, okay, we actually need to do teleoperation with people and we're going to first collect the data, then to, okay, we're going to do all those things, but in order to get there maybe the most efficiently, we're going to gamify. Was that kind of the three-part evolution we can say?
Yeah, pretty much. I would say it also like actually, this gamification part I think also leans in very well with just trying to get a robot body that is like less than $500. Obviously, we have to make a ton of like hardware trade-off. So and because we pick it as a gaming, right, the requirement actually for the robot is like it can be a toy, right? It can be very plasticky, right? So I think it just fits in very well to all the things that we wanted to do anyway. So we just really double down on the gaming side. Like I said, I don't think this is a fully validated thesis by us. But we have a number of anecdotal evidence. Also, for example, we do have gamers who are very much normie, I guess you call them Web2 gamers, who don't know has anything to do with crypto, but then would have paid us like hundreds of US dollars to play the game. Right, and we have gamers like that, like handful of them, and then occasionally we have some pretty big like Twitch streamers that would just all of a sudden show up and then just live stream the whole game. And so that to me, there's just so much like it's a very esports, very in fact augmented reality. Like, if you think of those kind of gaming angle, I think there's just a lot of things that we haven't fully actually explored yet. They can lend quite well um, to robotic gaming as a small niche genre. And so, I mean, my sense on robotic gaming is that if you kind of look at, again, like a gaming title like Euro Truck Simulator, right? It's a 10-year-old game. I believe its daily active is like 20,000 to 30,000 gamers, right? So like it's like it's not huge. It's definitely not like all those huge million concurrent games. It will never be a Fortnite, right? But it has such a loyal folks group of that will just play in year after year. So as a game, maybe it doesn't look like a crazy gaming title, but then as a robotic network, the largest sidewalk robot network, to my knowledge, even though they've been working on it for like I think nearly 10 years, is like 3,000-4,000 robots. So if you have a fleet that can support tens of thousands, you are by default the largest, robotic fleet of its kind, right? Cyber robot. So it's yeah. So I thought it actually the if you look at the order of magnitude, it is possible.
Can you talk about your fleet today and how people are interacting with the robots, the sidewalk robots now?
Yeah, so I would say we went through, I would say broadly maybe 2 phases of development. The first phase is, I mean, I would say even till today we don't have a token, right? So we don't have the actual DPIN thing going. So what we had to do, actually even to now, is that we still have to put all these robots on our own balance sheet, right? And we have very little capital until more recently, so we have to be really, really careful. But because the robots are so cheap, right? So it actually allow us to deploy these bots in. So we have deployed robots in over 50 cities actually, which is something that's never, I don't think anyone has done it before. Most of these other sidewalk robot projects, there will be maybe 10 cities, and that would be considered a lot, right? In our case, it's just toy, right? It's something that, and especially this version, is something that you can lift up by a hand, right? So so that has allowed us to actually very quickly deploy them in the real world, right? In many different cities, in very, very different environments. So we have bots in Europe. I mean, I would say one of the most memorable drive that I've done was we have a couple of bots in Sweden, and this happened during the winter time. I was in Singapore. It was super hot. But I was driving, probably to the the Swedes who basically saw this little bugger, driving around. Is like, what is this, right? It's probably a very mundane, like regular neighborhood, but to me it was just magical, right? Driving through snow. So yeah, these things have been through snow, have been through like really heavy rain, and surprisingly they hold up quite well. Even through like summertime in the Middle East, right? We have some bots in Abu Dhabi as well. I was quite surprised they do hold up. And so but yeah, so by having this kind of really cheap hardware allow us to scale geographically, even though they are all in a way sitting on our own balance sheet. So the way we've been doing it in our, like I said, in the first phase is we hire local hosts. And these are usually students actually. Oftentimes we give them, pay them an hour a day, right? Something like that. And to put it out, they charge a robot every day, put it out there, and then they'll do their own thing. They literally leave the bots there. And turns out it really depends on the neighborhood where you put it in. But in there are many places in the world where you can actually do this rather safely. So there are some locations we've been running it for like 2-3 years, no problem. So and somehow meaning the robot will still come back at the same place. Although in the intervening hours, actually maybe some gamers would have driven it around and completed some mission in the neighborhood, right? So I would say that setup where effectively you as a gamer, you can dial in, and access any random robots on our network, right? It's definitely have its own like appeal, because it's a little bit like virtual touring. Like I said, I was driving a bot in Sweden. I've never been to Sweden before myself, right? So that was very interesting. But I do think that this next phase we're going into, which we're focusing a lot more on, is a different kind of game mode where we are basically getting the gamers to drive the bot that they own, right? Instead of driving someone else's bot. The reason why we're doubling down on this particular mode for now is because you can imagine if everything is on our balance sheet, like it's because I don't have the whole DPIN thing yet going, right? So I only have like hundreds of bots. And you can imagine, even if you are a gamer who really like this kind of gameplay, but after a while, you realize it's all the same bots, right? Especially in your own time zone, right? Because only the bots in your own time zone will start to show up, right? Uh, and my own gut feel is that we need to be at least in the thousands before this game starts to feel like an open world game, right? That you can never finish playing. Because in a way, every robot to me represent roughly, let's say, 1 hour to 2 hours of unique gameplay. You can think of it almost like that. And so I think at our scale, we are not able to give people that experience yet. So I think, but I think I would say once we have the token going and we truly have the deep hinting going, we will definitely switch back to mode one, because that is the more maybe potentially more fun for some people, right? The fact that you can maybe, I don't know, like stick some token with some dude, and then you as collateral, you drive their bot around, pick up some NFT, which is the basic gameplay now. It's very Pokemon Go kind of gameplay, right? And so and then along the way you experience the world, right? That way. So but I think for now, especially because the robots are really cheap now, so I do think just it's quite affordable for most folks to just buy and maybe just drive around in their own neighborhood. They kind of like exactly Pokemon Go. People play Pokemon Go in your own city, collecting items in your own city, and I think that alone will already get us somewhere, especially once we have the crypto incentives. Yeah.
So today, for example, I would be driving around, and there are missions for me to accomplish, and there's things for me to do, or the gamification aspects with I guess the crypto incentives are not yet in, but are there still little things for me to collect and little missions for me to accomplish? And then that's like from my standpoint as the gamer, but from your standpoint as a company, what is the purpose that these bots are doing for you guys? Are they collecting really valuable data that you can use for monetization?
Yeah, great question. So like I said, it was our initial thesis that the data is useful, but honestly, it was a thesis. But I would say it has been proven. So from very very early on, because we care about the data, so we have set up the whole data pipeline. So from very early on, we started collecting data, and then I think once we have about a few hundred hours of data collected in the real world, which to back then I thought it wasn't a lot, but anyway, I just tried like reaching out to some researchers, and I found that the reception was very good actually from them. And so it turns out that actually the kind of data that we gather is extremely rare. Um, and when I say extremely rare, I want to emphasize again, like if you're only talking about video data, then it's not rare at all, right? There are a ton of this kind of like first person view, like dash cam video on YouTube, right? It's um the thing that is rare is that if the video is time stamped very precisely against human actions, because that is what you need to kind of set up the training pipeline to so-called learn from human. And because ours is a game, we record basically whatever the gamer is doing on his game controller, basically. And because we have the video and we have the action labels, then this data set becomes very unique and extremely rare, right? And anyway, so fast forward to today, like we have actually a lot of ongoing research collaboration with various researchers who do this kind of, they call it urban navigation research, right? So for example, a couple of weeks ago, there was this lab from UC Berkeley. They published a paper using our data set, and also they built up basically more or less a kind of like state of the art kind of navigation model. And then more importantly, they evaluated that model using our fleet of robots. So I want to say like what I started to realize is while our robots is out there collecting real world data, that exact fleet of robot also allows the researcher to evaluate the models in the real world. So that is actually this evaluation part. People doing AI development work in the digital world would never think about it because benchmarking is easy, right? Evaluation is easy. You let the AI do an Olympic math exam like in a second, and so it's never a bottleneck towards iteration cycle for digital AI. But in the real world, you have to test it in the real world. You can't speed up time, right? So you can test it in simulation all you want, but ultimately the proof is you need to do it in the physical world. And so so I started to realize actually some of the researchers do care a lot about the fact that we give them data, but actually some of them don't care as much, especially for those who rely a bit more on the more classical robotic techniques, like less learning based, less data driven kind of techniques. But I would say all of them care a lot that we have data in the real world for them to test. And so, but anyway, yeah, so that's how we started working with a lot of these researchers. And along the way, actually, we got to know some of the folks especially from DeepMind Robotics. I'm very good friends with a bunch of them. So we actually, I think for the second time now, we've actually co-organized this competition called the Earth Rover Challenge, where it's a very unique competition where we basically have human gamers. So we have the top human gamers in our game, representing humanity, if you will, and then competing against university teams who are researchers who do urban navigation research. They build the AI models that basically take on the same game exactly as the human gamers. And happy to report that at least for now, the humans are far ahead of the AI, right? For now. And so, but yeah, but I would say it's so I think this kind of collaboration, like the fact that I think like I say, it's more than 10 universities where we had this kind of collabs, and these are some of the best labs in the world doing this kind of research. And so I think our initial thesis that the data is useful, and then also like kind of like towards the end, we more recently we realized that the being able to offer them physical robot for evaluation is also extremely useful to them. Like these two things, just allow us to really do a lot of very like close collaboration with them. So I mean, right now we don't monetize the data set. We choose to freely give away. I think that's the right thing, at least at this stage, to do, because that allows us to just basically spread the word and get a lot more mind share, like from this top researcher to work with us. Yeah.
Why is urban navigation data valuable? Is it, because the future is going to be robots giving us all these deliveries, and we need to know the nitty gritty details of every neighborhood and kind of the sidewalks and everything like that? Or why do people find this valuable?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I would say that the probably the biggest economic unlock will be if you can do last mile delivery, right? Um, it could be food or grocery, right? The DoorDash, the Uber Eats. I mean, already huge category in and of themselves. If you look at logistics, typically the last mile cost of like even cross border delivery logistics, actually the last mile is easily 30 to 40%. So actually the last mile is extremely costly. And so yeah, I mean, if you can really build an AI that it can basically do what a DoorDash should do, or like what the Amazon delivery guy can do, then yes, it's a huge economic unlock slash capture perhaps. So I think that's where like the how you would fully monetize, capture value and unlock economically. I also want to say, like, actually, obviously I'm a bit biased because I started off doing urban navigation, but I do think actually sidewalk navigation is probably one of the hardest robotic tasks to solve. Maybe harder than what they call robotic manipulation, which is like, let's say, robot arms folding clothes. And in my view, probably also harder than self-driving on the road. The way I think about it is, for example, Andrew, like, when you drive, do you think you pay more attention driving on a highway or driving in a crowded car park?
Car park for sure.
Car park, right? So that tells you that actually the complexity of the task is less related to the speed, is a lot more related to how dynamic is the scene. And so if you take that view, right, when you drive on the road, at least there's traffic rules. Like, most of the time people do follow, like, all the cars move in the same direction in general. Whereas in sidewalk environment, the edge case is the norm because there's no rules, right? So you have all kinds of weird shit that I mean, one of the like most weird shit I've seen with one of our robot was that I think we had this spot in Berlin, and one of the guys was calling me, hey, I don't know what's happening to our robot, and then we started looking at the camera. It turns out there was this I think a stray dog that just kept humping our robot like for like 10 straight minutes. It was so odd to watch. But anyway, like, shit like this, right? And so and therefore, the more the edge cases there are, like the harder it is to gather a data set that represent enough of those edge cases, right? So but yeah, anyway, but I guess you can also argue though, like maybe unlike self-driving on the road, like if you fail, no one dies presumably. So maybe the requirement is not like 6.9, maybe you just need 4.9, right? So it is possible that way as well. Yeah, but I would say whoever can really crack urban navigation, yeah, you can take, basically you can be DoorDash, Uber Eats, and the last mile for Amazon. Yeah. And also if you imagine not just delivery, I mean it might be the other way actually. Like when you finally have humanoids, that is, everyone will have a humanoid at their home, your own robotic butler. You're gonna get that robots to help you do stuff in the run errands, right? I mean that robot still had to navigate in the neighborhood, right? If you wanted to do more things than just stuck at home, right? And so that robot will require navigation in urban environment. Yeah.
This Six Sigma that you keep mentioning, is this some sort of like holy grail of I guess safety measuring, where it's like it can't be 99% safe or good or effective, it has to be 99.9999, etc. Is that like the considered the holy grail, or why do you keep mentioning Six Sigma?
Yeah, I think it's 6 ML is like it's like kind of like I think the Japanese use it a lot. They use it for like to get really the QA, especially the Honda, the Toyota, right? They really treat it like the Bible. I mean, I just use it as a hand wavy way to say like so. In my view, like why I think, for example, I think we're still some ways away from, like, there's a lot of talk recently about ChatGPT for robotics kind of moment. I think we're some ways away because like I said, I do read a lot of papers, robotic papers, um, um, and most of these robotic paper will always have this chart, that they have a success rate chart. All of them are still measured in linear scale. So usually a lot of time the state of the art, like, let's say success rate would be like 70%, 80%, even 90%, right? But to me, so long they're still measuring things in linear scale, they are not talking seriously enough. It needs to be log scale. It needs to be log scale, right? Once you plot it into log scale, like every 9, 0.9, and then every 0.09, like it's a next logarithmic improvement. And I think you basically need this kind of success rate in order for you to consider replacing human. Um, and I should highlight, like, replacing human labor in very generalizable kind of settings. Obviously, we for decades now we have, like, robots that automate in manufacturing, conveyor line, and those are already done very well by classical robotics, where you have one robot that does one thing, one task repeatedly, thousands of times a day, super accurate, super precise, and those are, I would say, fully solved by now, right? So that is not, in my view, what is exciting about robotics today. What is exciting about robotics is because we start to have some line of sight on maybe these robots can be very generalizable, because humans are so generalizable, and so I think we are on a path, but it's still a lot of, like, I think, things that are holding us back, and not just the AI, by the way. It's also the hardware. For example, I'll just give you a quick example. Right now, we don't have touch sensors anywhere near what humans are capable, right? So, for example, I have this, like, object in my hand. I can put it in behind my hand, and I can do this. I don't need to see it, right? Obviously, you need touch, right? And so, but I would say nearly everything you see in robotics today, like all this robotics research paper, 99% is computer vision. But if you think about it, there's a lot of tasks that actually, the way humans does it and the performance we do come from touch. We take it for granted because we don't even think about it, right? It's so I would say hardware, like this, we also need hardware, like, improvement. Yeah, I would say the other thing is also, like, all these actuators that you see in humanoids today, they are nowhere near as agile and as good as let's say human joints, like, or animal joints, basically. so yeah, I think we are few factors away, even on the hardware side, a few generations, I would say, before we start to approach what humans can do. Yeah.
I want to talk to you about this, the use of crypto in the sense of, hey, you're thinking, okay, we want to build out this entire network of hardware devices. Crypto is a great mechanism for that. Helium being a perfect example. And then alternatively, we want to create a system that encourages usage and engagement. So we're going to gamify that. So in your opinion, the crypto aspect is, hey, we're going to scale hardware because people want to buy these devices because there's a crypto element to it, and people will engage with the actual product on a deeper level because they're playing and they're getting rewarded potentially with some sort of token or NFTs. So could you kind of describe that aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, deep in, and maybe like I would say all the play to earn games in the previous cycle, they all had a pretty bad name. But I think it's harder to imagine those working well, because like it's what is the utility of playing a game, right? But why should you be paid to play a game? But in this case, because the data generator, let's say, it could be useful, then there's a solid reason why you should be paid to play the game, right? Um, so, and I think, I honestly, my very naive way of thinking about, or simplistic way of thinking about why I'm in using crypto, and why I'm in crypto, is that it's just, if you set this up right, it's a very fair way to distribute um, rewards per your efforts put in. Right? It's just a crowdsourcing at scale in steroid. Yeah. So you do have to set up the tokenomics, or basically this incentivization properly, so that everyone contributing feel that they are getting their fair share. But once that is done, then it's kind of permissionless. People will just show up and do stuff, right? And this has happened many, many, many times across many different crypto projects. It has grown very, very big very quickly. So I think crypto has that ability. Um, I mean, people call it capital formation, but it's not just the financial capital. It's also just human labor, right? So, you know, human labor could be, let's say, again, the gamer from Philippines who are putting in time to teleoperate a robot. It could also be down to maybe not the gamer who teleoperate, but maybe a guy who love or don't mind having a bunch of robots in his home, and then he will maintain it, charge it every day, and then put it out there. Like, um, um, so that some humans, they need to do that, right? Because until the robots are so good that they can charge themselves, you need basically babysitter or bot sitter to look after these spots, and you need a lot of a lot of humans involved. Um, my own take about this is that, I mean, I do work a lot with, or partner with many of these like really brilliant researchers, but one maybe thing that I sometimes disagree with them is that I think it could be just that because they're researchers, they need to think this way. But I find that oftentimes they're trying to remove the humans in the loop far too quickly. Um, if you look at again what Tesla is doing, their human to robot ratio is 1 to 1. They are still 1 to 1 because every car has a human driving it, babysitting it, essentially. And so I think you shouldn't. My view is that you shouldn't remove the humans too early until you truly have level 5. And so, I take the view that actually a lot of things you do need a lot of humans involved, because the humans are way more capable physically, and also the physical intelligence as well. Um, and so, and crypto again, like it's a great way to incentivize people to spend human labor. Of course, like things like compute and all the hardware stuff, I think is all proven, right? I don't need to I don't need to shield this anymore. I think it's fairly proven. But I would say like manual labor is very much needed. And that's something that um maybe for people who don't, I would say a lot of times for outsiders looking into robotics, they would think, oh, the capex, right? Obviously, the capex is non-trivial. Especially humanoids. Humanoids are still pretty expensive, right? If you want to get a decent one from Unitree or Booster, it's still like 30 grand, right? It's like a car, you know. Um, and so, um, but I mean, I would say the operational cost of maintaining those robots, it's broadly speaking, in my mind, usually it's the rough math I have in my mind is if you put $1 to buy the capex, the hardware, you probably need to budget around another dollar to run the opex for another year.
Do you think the next 5 years, the future of robotics, whether it be, humanoids, et cetera, will they all be teleoperated?
Did you say teleoperated?
Yeah, but in order for them to actually be useful in like real world scenarios, will they have to be teleoperated, you think? And I know, this is a departure from what you're talking about, the cost, which is, I can't believe it's $1 of CapEx is $1 of maintenance per year. That's crazy. But just, hearing this, I'm like, oh man, maybe we're going to need the human in the loop for much longer than I expected. I thought it was going to be, I'm just reading things on Twitter and whatnot, but we're going to have humanoids in 3 years and it's going to be a crazy, future. But the way you're talking, I'm thinking, oh man, maybe over the next 5 years, we're going to need teleoperated humanoids and robotics in order for them to be active in real world environments.
Yeah, I think it depending on the task. Like so, I think within 2 years, probably you will have robotic arms that can autonomously fold your clothes pretty well, and it could be around. It will still be an expensive thing, but it will be like an expensive washing machine, let's say. And so I think some household will definitely will start to want to maybe buy that. Um, yeah. So, but then again, a machine that can fold clothes is still not doing the thing end to end, right? Because what you may want is also for it to hang clothes and for you to maybe, I don't know, like you set aside clothes. Maybe some clothes you need to keep for longer term. You put in a box, and then some clothes you need to hand. So um, and it's kind of like maybe a little bit like those all these like robot vacuum, right? Um, so I used to have one a top of the line that one of those from a Chinese vendor that do even like mopping the floor as well. So it's both water plus. It's really really good. I find that ultimately I still ends up using my Dyson. I'll do it myself because even it takes time away from me, but I'm just that much more efficient and that much more thorough. So I think it's gonna be like that. There will be people who will be okay maybe with 99% or maybe 95% of the work. But again, the last 1 to 5% is will still take another orders of like maybe another like 5 years, after that. So you start to see, I would say, some of these more, let's say, bespoke system that will start to come into household. Certainly, I think manufacturing setting as well. Um, Personally, I know that there are a lot of bets, like for example, Figure is trying to deploy humanoid in manufacturing settings. Um, yeah, I think it's very impressive what they're doing. So maybe famous last word, but I sometimes wonder, like especially in a control environment where maybe it might make sense to just build like a more purpose built robot that need not to have that humanoid like form factor. Like, why do you need two legs? The whole warehouse is flat, presumably. You can probably just have a wheelbase, which will make the whole thing a lot easier to solve. Um, but in any case, I think to answer your questions, it's not going to be like the digital AI thing. It's not going to take off like that because, I mean, you can't speed up time, and and evaluation in the real world takes time, right? And so, I mean, and analogy sometimes I give is, imagine, let's say FSD, let's say Tesla ship the next FSD version, let's say FSD 14, and let's say within a day they have 1 million miles, okay, collected using FSD, and let's say there's no crash or disengagements. The question is, does Tesla or anyone in the world know whether they truly solve level 5? You don't really know, because what if in the next mile there's a crash? So what I started to realize is that in the physical world, or embodied AI or robotics AI, the only verifiable fact is when there's a real world failure. So it's very paradoxical, right? So the only positive thing you can get is when things go to shit, you know, and you, so in a way, the better that your AI model, the longer it will take before you see some real shit goes down. And so it will take you longer to verify whether you have truly have a model. So again, because of all these dynamics, I do think that it will take a long time actually it will feel a lot longer. Um, but I do think they will come also rather soon for maybe smaller use cases like folding of clothes and whatnot. Yeah.
And briefly, you mentioned the maintenance costs, which that to me is shocking. You said, for example, we have a $30,000 Unitree robot, but you said $1 of capex might cost you $1 of maintenance per year. What is that? Are these replacement parts, or what is this maintenance going towards?
Yeah, it's mainly the human, right? because these robots are gonna break all the time. So, and they are also in general not safe near untrained people. So you oftentimes basically have a human there babysitting it, right? Um, I mean, you look at a humanoid. Basically, you can think of it like an electric scooter that is 1 meter above ground. Imagine an electric scooter dropping on your feet 1 meter from above. Is this roughly that? So it will hurt, and uh, it may be extremely dangerous if you have kids or like really elderly people, right? So and also the way, especially, I mean, since we're talking about humanoid, like a lot of the, if you look closely at a lot of these humanoid manufacturer today, like the way they structure the mechanical design is that they basically have actuators at the joints. Now, if you look at human beings or any animals for that matter, the actuators are in your core, right? So in your bicep. The joints are where you have basically are pivot points. So you just have tendons, and so these are all cable driven, right? So it matters because if your actuators is here, you you're relying on really good actuators, and it's amazing what the actuators can do this, but they are actually creating extremely big, like basically angular momentum. So for them to stop, they need to like really just stop. But if you get hit by it, it's not as compliant if you get hit by an arm like that, because there is the yeah, it's like if you do the so-called the full angular momentum calculation, you realize it's actually a lot less. But I would say like it's therefore it's actually not really safe. If you get hit by this kind of humanoid, you definitely get a bruise, right? Um, I do think, like for example, One X, I think maybe Optimus from Texas, they are starting to do maybe tendon based along some joints. But you can imagine is is harder to maintain and harder to design for and harder to manufacture. Um, yeah. So whereas is if it's actuators at the joints, if it fail, you just take it out and then put it in, right? Because everything is just static part, right? So it's very easy to maintain and therefore cheap to scale up. So I think it's a trade off. And so, but yeah, I mean, yeah. So I think safety is another thing as well. Yeah. So, uh, you along the path to having like good humanoids that you, let's say, help you in the home, will definitely have humanoid that accidentally, like maybe even kill somebody. Like I think it will be like that, right? And so, and then there will be some backlash. There will be a lot of safety issues, not to mention all the privacy, right? A consideration. People complain about having like uh, like webcams that like all this from Google or Nest, um, and so now instead of a static camera, you have a camera that's stick onto something that can also move, right? So it can do stuff, and so yeah, so there's a lot of things that like on the path there will be a lot of, I think, compliance, privacy, safety issues that we still need to iron out. And I suspect different society, like different cities, different uh, countries will have different ways of treating these. Yeah.
So overall, humans are going to be in the loop a lot longer than I expected. But for you, it makes total sense, and there's safety issues and all efficiency gains and whatnot. So is that why you decided also to start creating BitRobot, which is essentially the kind of the crowdsourcing platform that does it plug into Frodobots, or how does BitRobot fit within this ecosystem that you're creating?
Yeah. So I started having this idea for BitRobot about a year ago. Because at the time, basically, obviously, we've been doing Sour Robot, and we started like collaborating with a lot of researchers, and I started to realize, oh no, in fact, they started to realize, oh, besides Sour Robot, can you do some other robot? And then one of them asked me to take a look at this project that do like robotic arm, and I said, oh, okay, maybe I can do it. So it started that way, and then I started to realize maybe like this sour robot thing that we're doing, that eventually, I mean, I wanted to have a crypto incentive to collect this sour robot data set. Let's say it's in a way maybe a specialized case of a much more generalized case, where again you can use crypto incentives to get many different type of resources, right, and do it a lot more efficiently than a big centralized entity like the Google and the OpenAIs of the world. I think there's some things that I think they will do very well, but there are some things that, like I for example, I can't imagine OpenAI or Google go and try to have like a tiny cyber robots running around in like hundreds of cities around the world. I think the privacy backlash will be too big for them probably. But for a tiny, weird crypto project, it's completely okay, right? Because anyway, it's all cross-source, it's all permissionless, right? So, um, and so, but yeah, I started to realize you don't need to just like limit to like cyber robot. You can do in fact all kinds of robotic embodiment, right? It could be humanoid, it could be surgical robots, it could be drones and whatnot. And then on top of that, if you start thinking like that, it's you can in fact go beyond just so-called, let's say, real world data collection. You can in fact, for example, use criteria incentivize incentives to get a lot of GPU to help you train, let's say, world model, right? World models is on the rage today, and world model in a way is a data-driven simulation engine that can help you. Maybe it's a better simulation engine, right? But basically, give you synthetic data that you can use to train robots. Okay, right? So this is still data collection, but it's data collection in a simulation environment. But to do that, you basically need a lot of GPU. So, and I think Kutu can definitely get you GPUs. So so yeah, and I would say around that time I started looking into BitTensor, and I would say the reason why we call it BitRobot, honestly, it's I want to kind of pay homage to the BitTensor folks, because I would say before BitTensor I wouldn't have believed that it's possible to do a network of subnets. I think other projects have tried to do it, but I think BitTensor was the one that convinced me that it's possible, right? So honestly, I also kind of went down the rabbit hole a little bit. I did seriously consider maybe doing a subnet on BitTensor. But what gave me the push to do like BitRobot as a separate thing was, I think, one, which is that I believe embodied AI will be so big, it deserves its own BitTensor, right? Yeah, so that's one. The other part of it is I just find that it's a little bit too difficult to compare. Let's say, there are subnets that do protein folding, right, on BitTensor. There's another subnet to do LLM, let's say, something to do LLM. And then if you have another robotic thing and like as another subnet, I just find that all of them are very important, but they're all completely different. And so when it comes time to like distribute the token, it's almost like so different, qualitatively different, that there's no basis of judgment between them. Whereas if you set up a BitTensor like thing, that's basically a BitRobot is going to be a network of subnets, right? Even though you could have one subnet, let's say, doing cyber robot stuff, another one doing humanoid friend and egg, let's say, or maybe another one doing world models for self-driving, let's say. Even though they are all different, but because it's still in the embodied AI space, I think you can at least compare them. Not apple. It's got to be green apple to red apple kind of comparison, I think. And part of that belief actually comes from also I would say this line of research called cross embodiment. So it's a pretty hot research area the last 1-2 years. In fact, the best paper that came from the biggest robotic conference last year, from the DeepMind folks, is about exactly this, right? So the idea for cross embodiment is that it's possible for you to train a more generalizable and in a way a more performance AI model, and embodied AI model, if you have data set, let's say, coming from a robotic arm as well as, let's say, cyber robot. So the most dramatic like paper I've seen that they kind of showcase this is, I think there's another paper from Berkeley. I can't remember the paper name, but basically these guys train a model that can fly a drone using data from a cyber robot as well as robotic arm. It's crazy, right? Obviously it's a pretty bad model, but somehow this model that fly a drone is able to fly a drone. So I think the intuition there is that ultimately all these robots, they all operate on Earth, right? And everything is subject to the same gravity. Physical law is the same everywhere, right? And so there's a fair bit of positive learning transfer, let's say, whether you are gathering learnings from a humanoid form factor or you're learning from cyber robot. So just now, I mentioned about like, if why like solving cyber robot, like having cyber robot data is important. And I mentioned humanoid because even though the data you collect from this small little bugger, right? Actually, this data set, I believe, can be transferred quite easily to humanoid. And so if you take that view, right, then therefore you can argue that there are all these different subnets. Eventually, the whole is going to be bigger than the sum of parts, and there's a lot of synergy between them. And so yeah, so I would say the whole cross embodiment line of research added a bit more, like, I would say, scientific rigor to my thinking about, okay, why something like BitRobot may make sense. And so yeah, it's a it's a very ambitious project, I do think, trying to use crypto incentive to gather all sorts of resources, um, to make a meaningful, like, push to embody AI. Um, I think crypto has a chance to do something meaningful, but we do have a not a very big window to do that, I think, in the next few years. Because the Web2 guys, clearly have the big ones are, the big startups are raising hundreds of millions, right? The big boys, OpenAI, Google, DeepMind, Gemini, Robotics, Nvidia, there are huge resources being poured in. So, but I do think there are some, actually, not like a number of things that I think just it's way better to 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 do it distributed, to crowdsource, basically. So I think that's where crypto can really move the needle.
So this is a bad analogy, but like, would you say that if you had to summarize, like, what you're roughly building is scale AI for robotics? Because scale AI is like doing the data labeling. Before, they were doing it with humans, and then over time they used AI to help label the data. They still probably use some humans. Is that kind of like a rough analogy? It's like, hey, we're going to get this really valuable data and help all these companies with their data needs, by using humans and combined with AI to collect all this very valuable real world data. Is that like a okay analogy or not really?
Yeah, I think that would capture maybe half the story, because scale AI do data only, more or less. And obviously, BitRobot will have a bunch of subnets collecting data. It could be real world data, teleoperation data, but like I mentioned, it could be synthetic data. It could also be video data. But beyond data collection, I think there will be subnets that actually try to build the models themselves. So again, I mentioned about that competition that we co-organize with the DeepMind folks. If you look at the competition, which is going to be a subnet, by the way, right? What happens in that competition is that we have a bunch of researchers from all these universities. They take some data coming from, let's say, subnet one, right, which have all this cyber robot data. But then these researchers take those data, we give them a bunch of compute, right? Again, using crypto incentives. At the end of the day, what is the outcome of that competition is a bunch of AI models. And so that actually will, I think, should just be, if we wanted 1,000 access, we definitely want to do that, right, for that competition. How do we give these researchers a lot more data, a lot more compute, and a lot more robots to test in the real world, right? But this subnet, the output is not data. The subnet is actually the final thing, the AI models. And so I think there will be subnets in BitRobot that actually get to the final thing. So, and I would argue, actually, the more, obviously, I started collecting data as a thing. I do take the view now that I think, in a way, data, like, if you have proprietary data and variable data that's useful for research, it gives you a seat at the table, let's say. But in terms of value capture, it's very hard to do, technically speaking. And also, actually, economically speaking, you probably don't deserve, or it will be very hard to capture, a decent um, slice of the pie. In a way, if you look at what OpenAI pays Reddit, right? I think they pay them $50 a year or something like that. It's peanuts compared to what OpenAI earns, right? But I would argue Reddit is probably one of the best data set out there on the internet. So as a proprietary data provider, Reddit gets, a tiny amount. So I think that the biggest value capture will be done by those who do the final thing. Because what ultimately everyone wants is the final AI model, the real physical, so-called artificial physical intelligence, right? The embodied AI. If you can do that, then it's very easy to monetize. You just sell transformer tokens, and because that's the final thing people want, right? And so, and I think if BitRobot, some subnets are able to do that, then hopefully BitRobot as a network can capture some of the value, and then obviously that value get transferred back to the token holders. Yeah, so it's I would say scale AI only do the data, but I think BitRobot will have subnets that do more than just data. Yep.
So can you give me the roadmap for obviously it's going to be some guesstimation here, but the roadmap for the next decade of robotics? Like let's say like, oh, we're going to have delivery wheeled vehicles in 3 years, or like fully autonomous or whatever, even though it's kind of already happening today. But and then 5 years we're gonna have humanoids, and then in 7 years we're gonna have drones doing delivery. Like, can you, to your best guess, give us kind of the 10-year roadmap for robotics? I know it's a big question, but what do you think?
Yeah. Okay, maybe famous last words from me, but I'm slightly less optimistic than some of the other guys' timeline. I think home humanoid is probably the biggest, going to be probably $1 trillion thing, like what Elon Musk kept saying. Uh, mm, I think to do it at the price point that the household will want to like buy one, as if you're buying a washing machine, and have it safe enough that and then also have it do enough things to justify the price. I'm guessing is 5 to 10 years. I don't know whether it's it's yeah, it's far enough. And then, I mean, it could be 5 years if certain things start to come through, but it also could be 10 years. um, um, I mean, I keep coming back to the self driving because, like I think we are right about at the cusp where self driving really starting to work, starting to scale. I sat for the first time in a self driving car in 2015. So I got the chance to set in. This is like before Waymo, right? So I got a chance. A buddy of mine from Google let me go for a joyride. And this is like, I think they call it Google Brain. It's this circular thing. And I was just mind blown, right? I was driving around in Palo Alto autonomously. And I thought, oh gosh, man, this is going to be everywhere in the next few years. And of course, like 10 years later, we're still talking about it. And so I suspect it might be like that, It's like we're so close, but then the closer we are, we still realize that it's like the next 9 still matters. you Um, and not to forget, like in a lot of places, human labor is quite cheap. So, of course, there are also places where, like, people are running into labor shortage all the time, right? So it's um yeah, I guess, I mean, yeah, maybe 5 to 10 years, yeah. But maybe some of these, like, more specific, like, things like I said, like a bimanual arm that is folding clothes. I think that's something like 2 years away. So I think we're quite close on those. And if you ask me this about the folding clothes thing 1 year ago, I would have guessed 5 years, but clearly my timeline has shortened because I've seen stuff, and I'm quite convinced it can be done in the next 2 years. So I might be wrong again on the big humanoid thing. Yeah. I mean, for now, for sure, I won't put the humanoids anywhere near my kids or my parents. Yeah, is not safe. um, yeah.
What do you think about drone delivery? Is the primary thing stopping drone delivery? Is that regulation, or do you think there's still a big safety and kind of intelligence issue around drones?
Yeah, I think delivery. You're talking about last mile delivery, right? Like the sidewalk, right? Good question. I think it's. I think to replace the DoorDash guy or the Amazon delivery guy, maybe at least another 5 years or so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Same as humanoids.
At least another 5 years. Yeah. Yeah. At least another 5 years. I mean, in some sense, like, I don't know whether it's an overkill to get a humanoid to do the last mile delivery. And maybe the right form factor is still something like a box, like the cyber robot thing that you've seen around. But then that is still a bit of a question. I mean, like I said, like the hardware, they can't climb stairs well, they can't press the lift, they can't go escalator. So, yeah. And also the AI stuff, I think, is non-trivial. Like it's like I say, I do believe sidewalk navigation is actually harder than self-driving on the road. So, yeah. I mean, to my knowledge, most of these sidewalk robot startups, they actually, some of them maybe will claim that they are level 4, but I mean, if I'm not wrong, most of them are definitely have teleoperators in the loop, right? Very much so. And so I think you cannot get to the unit economics where you can compete against a human until you truly don't have humans in the loop. And that's a level 5, right? And the gulf between level 2 and level 5 could be another 10 years. Yeah. So I think maybe Sour Robot is even harder. Yeah. So it's at least another 5 years also in my view.
So this is a naive question, but I am seeing the rapid increase of I think ChatGPT or I forget what it is. Sam Altman was saying that intelligence in AI models is increasing 300% per year, right? So just like compounding at just an absurd rate, log scale as you mentioned before. That's kind of the true test of progress right there. And couldn't we have a scenario where like in 2 years we have just even a sidewalk robot is just unbelievably smart, right? It is as smart as a human, so it can navigate the dog and go around the rock and whatever and avoid the people that are trying to attack it or whatnot. And wouldn't that accelerate the timelines massively if we can get very cheap, very highly intelligent computers to fit inside of these bots?
Yeah. So what you're describing is basically the pace of improvement for AI that is in the digital realm. And I definitely think that we will have AGI of by that definition in the next 2 to 3 years. So yeah, I do believe we will have AGI before we have embodied AI. I guess embodied AGI. Yeah. Uh, I think the last remaining jobs for humans are probably hairdresser, plumber, athletes, chef. I think chef. Yeah, extremely hard to do what a chef can do. Yeah. So
So for example, if I a drone, if we give it AGI level intelligence in this drone's body, if you will, and it can see everything and can kind of navigate, couldn't couldn't it just navigate all the issues? And let's pretend that there was a parachute or whatever, so it's very safe or whatnot. But couldn't it just kind of overcome a lot of these physical AI issues that we're talking about because it's as smart as a person? Or you're like, no, like literally the limiting factor is just like the data set. Like it just can't get that smart in the physical world because we're not training in the physical world yet on a mass scale.
yeah, I think the iteration speed is very different for robotics. Especially if you consider the last step, which is evaluation. You know, um, when OpenAI or DeepSeek they open a model or Llama, like you realize that the first thing they show you is a bunch of benchmarks, and obviously there's no perfect benchmarks, but they get those benchmarks probably within an hour, or less. So even though there's no perfect benchmark in that world, but they are never um, a bottleneck in the iteration speed. But again, what I mentioned about the 1 million miles thing for Tesla, how do you know whether you built a very good embodied AI model unless you truly test it in the real world? You cannot speed up time. So, so there will be this big unknown period where you are just waiting to see things fail, you know, and because you can't speed up time in the real world, you will just have a very very long period where you have to kind of just lock in more evidence that this won't fail, this won't fail. If you notice the iteration cycle for, let's say, Tesla, they're starting to get longer and longer. A little bit like that, and that's only my suspicion. My suspicion is they just need more miles to see the next failure case. Like beyond a certain point, I think these models mainly learn from failures, not so-called positive examples. And when the failure cases are so far in between, you just need to take more time. And you can't speed that up. And now the other thing I also want to point out is that like sometimes I wonder whether we are in a local minima where right now the way we're scaling towards, like, let's say, intelligence is through scaling through data and compute, right? So everyone understood that now. But if you think about, okay, I call this the mosquito intelligence. So if you look at a mosquito, right, its power consumption is probably 0.1 watt or less than that. I don't know whether you try to kill a mosquito before. It's damn hard to kill one. So they have these guys are damn agile, which means they have damn good physical intelligence. So how can something that consumes so little power, and so I don't know, like it seems to me that like and this guy, I mean, you can say that, oh, he's got hundreds of millions of like experience that basically learn from that. But I mean, the fact is that like a mosquito will not remember at all what the generations did, right? I mean, so, and yet very soon, once the guy becomes a mosquito, he can fly around and figure things out, and then basically be really good at it. So it seems to me there's a very different paradigm that has maybe nothing to do with scale. And there are some like research that's kind of in the robotics world going towards this line. So there's this group that I really like from Imperial College, Edward John's group. I interviewed him recently on our own podcast called Robo Paper, but basically his group focused a lot on this concept of in-context learning. Basically, small model, and you basically, instead of like loading it with a ton of data, you just teach it while give it some demo while it's doing it, and then we just correct it, like, which is kind of like what humans kind of do, right? You don't need a million examples before you know how to pass your mouse from right hand to left hand. So I don't know. I maybe like that's another like big element here, surprise down the road, where someone figure out another way to scale. Not maybe scale is not the word to use. It's just a different algorithm breakthrough, something to do with maybe offline reinforcement learning. I suspect, if I were to guess, they're basically way more data efficient than what is now. Then actually we are not talking about like having a lot of compute and having a lot of data. Is literally just how the animal kingdom does it. And so yeah, so I think that's the other thing that sometimes I wonder. I don't know, like but at least we don't have the algorithm yet, so if we don't have the algorithm breakthrough, then we're still on this path of more data, more compute, use crypto to get thousands of people around the world contribute and build towards that. Yeah.
But so, another naive question here, but couldn't I make a digital twin of the roads? Let's pretend I'm Tesla and I want to accelerate my self-driving learning. Couldn't I make a digital twin of the roads? And of course, it's not going to be exactly 1-to-1, but it'll be pretty good simulation. And couldn't I just make a million iterations of that and have the full self-driving like train in real time? Or no, like the digital twin technology is not even remotely good enough or remotely close enough to the actual world.
Yeah, I think simulation, there are a few issues. Well, I must say that I think simulation, especially world models, will have a big role to play for robotics. I do think so. But it's not going to solve everything. And there are a couple of issues with simulation. So there are some tasks where simulation will fail pretty miserably. Like simulation has done well is usually where they call it locomotion, where let's say you've seen all this like crazy humanoid doing dancing and all this, right? But if you look at really what the task at hand, the environment is very static. There's no other human or robots in the environment. So and that's where simulation do very well. Simulation, in my view, will completely not work for navigation, because the difficult part is not simulating. Like, I mean, this is the easiest robot in the world, right? It only have 2 degrees of freedom, right? Go straight, go back, turn left, turn right. That's it. So the difficult in simulation is not simulating what you do as a robot. The difficult part is simulating the environment. But it becomes very chicken and egg, right? If you have not solved level 5 autonomy, how do you simulate the behavior of the next car or of the pedestrian, who are all level 5 beings, right? So that's one big chicken and egg thing, right? So on some tasks, I don't think simulation alone can solve it. I think there's a big question now. Maybe very good data-driven world models can solve it potentially. I think it's still very much TBD. The reason I'm still a little bit, I don't think it alone can solve it is because, yes, like in simulation, in theory, you can speed up time, like you said, 1 billion times, let's say. The thing though, like the thought experiment I would run through usually is like this, right? So imagine, let's say you ask a simulation engine to imagine a robotic arm that's frying an egg. Okay. Now, just think of all the different permutations you can potentially have of a robotic arm that's frying egg. Every egg looks similar, but then every egg is unique, right? Not only that, I mean the frying pan, the lighting in the environment, fire versus electric, like that's, if you consider all these variables, the search space or exploration space, that means potential alternate worlds you can simulate, is nearly infinite. Now, so what if you can speed up time by 1 billion x? Question is this a good sample size of the entire, alternate universe that you can have? I mean, in statistics, right? Like, you basically you just sample, right? And you take a sample, it's definitely a small sample of the overall population. But if you more or less know that this is a normal distribution or whatnot, like that you can tell something about the overall population. My what I'm not so sure about simulation is that what if the world is not normal distribution? Like, it's just so many different edge cases potential, right? And so what if you can 1 billion x time, you're still barely pushing, on a string. Maybe it's not enough. Whereas if you collect things in the real world, at least it's real, right? So it would directly translate, for sure it's real. um, and it's not clear to me, like whether you 1 billion x time you can actually cover enough of the search space, right? Maybe the search space is so big. Then the last thing I would say is that when you talk about simulation, at least as of today, we are in my view, very bottlenecked by the talents who know how to run simulation well. My own guess is that there are only a few thousand people, or maybe less than 1,000 people in the world who knows how to run it well. A lot of people can do simulation. When I say run it well, that means run it at scale without wasting your GPU. Because if you don't know what you're doing, you'll be, you can simulate whatever you want to simulate, but you always have this, what they call sim to real gap, because whatever you simulate doesn't give a wide enough distribution that mirrors what may happen in the real world. And if it doesn't mirror enough, catch all the edge cases that may happen in the real world, then you have wasted a ton of GPU, right? And so to do simulation well, you are very bottlenecked by those, like, basically unicorn researchers who know what to do when given a big, like cluster of H100s, let's say. And so, and we're also very bottlenecked by those guys, I think. Yeah. Of course, NVIDIA will want to tell everyone, hey, simulation solve everyone, because they have all the compute. And they also got the talent to run the compute, to run the simulation. But yeah. So I think to solve robotics, you would need simulation. You probably also need video data, but you also need teleop data in the real world, right? They all have their own different trade-offs. And yeah, you will need all three, I think.
Which industries are you thinking will be transformed by robotics first? And I of course, there's manufacturing, which I think that there's already heavy use of robotics in manufacturing, but I guess I'm talking about more of like the level above that, not just like one task all day, more about this, the ability to do different tasks, kind of like that last mile delivery that we're talking about.
Yeah, I imagine it would be easier to be done in manufacturing. I suppose there are still human jobs, physical human jobs that are in manufacturing plant. Because, like, once you're in a manufacturing settings, then safety is a lot less less of a concern, for sure. So it'll be easier to deploy them. But I'm not sure. I mean, I've never done manufacturing like that level kind of automation. I mean, we do manufacture like toys today, right? It's not very clear to me whether that's the biggest one. I do think the biggest one is humanoids at homes, or yeah, in let's say urban settings. I think that is the biggest one. Probably $1 trillion at least. Kind of.
Which is the first though?
Sorry.
Like, because humanoids, I agree, are the ultimate kind of end goal, but it sounds like that's kind of a little bit farther away. Which industries are going to be transformed first by robotics besides manufacturing?
Yeah, I think manufacturing first, but also some more like limited. I mean, I keep mentioning about clothes folding because I personally absolutely hate folding clothes, but I have to do it. So I will probably be one of the early buyer. I don't mind paying thousands of dollars for a machine that can fold clothes for me. um, and I'm okay with 95% success rate because I just hate it so much. so that will be, I think, this kind that will be faster. Um, but that is still a fairly restricted, like, single use case kind of robots, right? Yeah. But I think the biggest again is the humanoid form factor. I do believe that but we are quite far, I would say.
For the folks that are listening and that are bullish on the robotics revolution, what businesses do you think that they could start in order to ride the wave of robotics or kind of be involved? But they're like, listen, I'm not going to try to outcompete Google or Microsoft or whatever on these robotics, but I do want to ride this wave and be involved. Like, have you thought about any business opportunities that are tangential? Like maybe, oh, I'm going to train to become a technician for humanoids and other robotics and just kind of be able to fix them and set up a repair shop, or like what are these business opportunities in your mind that you've pondered?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think that's why we want to set up BitRobot. It's to allow, let's say again, that gamer in Philippines to feel that he has a slice in the pie. I think a lot of them maybe grew up watching Star Wars or whatnot and love robots, but obviously don't have the opportunity to become a researchers and whatnot. But like I said, I do very much believe we need a lot of humans in the loop. And so could be humans who help to look after, do basic maintenance, charge the robot, that kind of stuff, deploy them basically. We need a lot of these humans to do it. We also need probably humans to do teleoperation, right? Yeah, and I think I, I I would say like these are all very like active ways to so-called participate. But of course, if for those who are like intellectually curious about the space, um, I do want to show my own podcast called Robo Papers. So I do this weekly podcast with this a friend of mine called Chris Paston. So Chris leads the AI efforts at Agility, right? Another humanoid company in US. But we basically every year we interview authors from basically some of the top like robotic AI papers. Pretty technical, but because I'm a layman, more layman, I would say definitely compared to Chris. So I try to ask all the dumb questions. So maybe, but I would say it's still not for the faint of heart. It's quite technical sometimes. But if you really want to deep dive, I think Robo Papers, that podcast is actually really good. I do think is as a resource. We have usually some of the best paper that get published. Usually within a few weeks, we'll get them on the podcast. Yeah. Recently, like CVPR, the biggest computer vision conference, the best paper there. The author was on our podcast like last month. And then there was another best paper recently that was also on our podcast. Like, yeah, so I think we were quite lucky to get good researchers. So I mean, for those, yeah, I mean, if you're interested, can listen into those. Honestly, I try to keep up with the research. It helps me a lot. Like, I mean, I'm geeky that way. So, and like I said, I read a lot of papers. I think it forces me to understand maybe let's say 50% of the paper. Maybe in the past I only understand 20 to 30%. Um, um, yeah, I do think that. I mean, obviously, again, I'm biased, but seeing where like AI is advancing in the digital realm, I think once we hit real AGI in the digital realm, I imagine the only investable and worthwhile things for humans to do is in robotics. So if you take that view, right? I mean, what's that to do if you have AGI in the digital realm? The only thing left is in the physical world where we still have a bit of an edge. And so if you take that view, then actually it's not too late to invest in robotics. It might be the only last things that humans can still contribute because the AI still stuck at like still cannot fry an egg. Yep.
All right. Well, maybe my next after Sir me and this podcast, I'll start training to be a plumber or a chef. Those seem safe for the next few years. So that'll be my target. All right. So you're reading all these papers and talking to all these incredible people at the podcast is Robo Papers, right? Yeah, Robo Papers. And what are some like underrated breakthroughs or kind of like cool trends, or because you're on the bleeding edge, right? So what are some things that are really exciting for you that you've learned that these researchers or founders are creating that has you super pumped up? Because we're talking in this podcast is, of course, everything you're building with Frodobots and BitRobot and everything else, and it's very exciting. But you're also tampering the expectation. You're like, listen, like we're not going to get humanoids tomorrow. It's going to take some years. So in terms of these breakthroughs that you're reading about, anything that you're like, oh my gosh, this is incredible, or is it still pretty tampered and kind of more of a linear progress?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, for robotics, it's harder to get the wow factor, unlike the AI in the digital realm, like it's because the pace of iteration is so fast. Robotics is just slow, and you look at it, it's like, huh? It can fold a clothes, and you think this is like state of the art, right? You know, but honestly, that's where like robotics still is today. So, but there are a number of trends on the research world that I think it's very interesting. Like world model, like I mentioned, is a big one. um, so one model is in a way it's still a simulation, but it's a very different way to think about simulation. Is as very data driven kind of like simulation, right? So I think world models it's gonna play a big part in robotics. So and there's a lot of like top researchers working on it now. Um, I think cross embodiment, like I mentioned earlier, how do you take learnings from a let's say humanoid and then apply it to cyber robot and vice versa? I think things like that, right? And so I think that's because if that research start to really pay dividends, then in theory need less data. We just need more diverse data, right? So I think that's very and that's why people are excited to work on it, right? Um, I think that there are like I mentioned the group from Imperial College that in context learning. I personally think that is my favorite paper from last year actually. So the paper is called Instant Policy from Edward John's group. So definitely worth if not read the paper, then maybe check out the podcast. Um, and then I would say some of the big ones. You know, uh, basically what the foundational model can do out of the box. I'm talking about the Gemini, the GPT-4o kind of like model that is multimodal. That are starting to be trained also using some robotic data. So I mean, I believe the Gemini guys, the way they think about it is they just treat robotic data as another modality other than text and videos and images. And so the more they start to rope in robotic as a first class citizen along text and image, the more I think you get a lot out from just a huge foundation model, just from like the Geminis of the world, basically the couple of huge foundational model. And so, um, yeah, I think those will be really interesting to see how they can perform. Because right now, in some ways, you can say that they are behind the more bespoke model, but on the other hand, they are extremely generalizable. Um, because they do have the internet scale data from the text and the images and the videos, right? And so, yeah. Um, but like I mentioned earlier, like I still at the back of my head, I'm thinking, hey, the mosquito never had don't need that kind of amount of power, don't need that amount of compute, probably have never had that kind of memory, probably have a extremely short term memory. How can it fly so well? Um, uh, yeah. So you have to wonder, like, are we missing something very, very fundamental?
There's got to be a better algo out there somewhere. There's some god tier algorithm that will help us. So one day we'll find it. Well, Michael, this has been incredible, and thank you for going over time. I appreciate that. It's been an incredible conversation.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much for having me, man. It's been a great chat. Yeah.
Of course, you're gonna have to come back on again in some months because I feel like with the even though you say the pace isn't going that rapidly, maybe for you because you're in it every day. For me, it seems like the pace of robotics has been absolutely insane over the past year or and change. So, very excited to have you on again in the future.